Grief looks different for everyone. It has no timeline, no single shape, and no right way to move through it. Whether your loss feels fresh or quietly lingers, this video was created to hold space for you, your feelings, your memories, and your healing. Can you tell me about your first experience with grief?
Oh, wow.
It's funny because in hospice, that was one of the questions that the guy who was leading it asked about what was your first experience in grief. And I hadn't thought about it before.
When I found out I had terminal cancer, last stage cancer, I didn't cry. I didn't cry for a very long time. And that bothered me because I really want to live my death, which means I want to really experience my dying and everything that goes with it. And so to be there so dry-eyed was kind of disturbing to me. So I did not want to push my grief down, and I also didn't quite know how to grieve, how to bring it up.
But my first experience in grief when I was 10 years old, that I remember, I don't remember my grandparents and stuff, was a 10-year-old child that died at home from some medical thing that I didn't know about. And I was not allowed to go to the funeral, which would have been helpful if I went to the funeral. So I don't think I was sad, but I was really not as smart as I am now. I didn't have as much experience as I have now, but that was my first experience that I really carried with me for my life.
Well, my first experience with grief was 1976. My mother was pregnant with my sister Sarah, and the baby died in childbirth.
But my first experience with my own grief for my children was my Sarah Elizabeth was a stillborn baby.
I have this distinct memory of my dad knocking on my door, like late at night. He came home, grabbed me and my older sister, and kind of, we were little, and brought him into his room and bed and told us, and just not understanding what that meant at 4 years old, but being sad.
We did have a little thing at the funeral home where my mother and father and the family came and saw her and walked around her casket. I don't know if Michael talked about this, but I remember Michael was a little kid. I can't remember how old he was, but he'd walk around and talk to his sister.
During the wake, me walking around the tiny little casket, and then just being sad and not understanding really what was going on or why I was sad.
Can you talk a little bit about Dan?
I could talk a lot of it about it.
Or like more
I
like
can't talk a little bit about it.
like a little bit of like that grief process.
I was living on the West Coast and got a call in the middle of the night, and it was my mother screaming into the answering machine, and it was terrible, and that he was in an automobile accident. She didn't know a lot. She would call when she could, and it was hours and hours and hours and hours before we heard anything. And then we got the call that he was in very, very rough shape, and trying to talk to my sister and trying to assess if I needed to get on a plane or we were standing by or whatever, and because she didn't really know. And then finally my uncle grabbed the phone and said, "Come home, just get on a plane and come home." And so He was very thankful for that. We rushed and got on the next available flight and flew home. And yeah, so it was very different, that whole process, and to today, because I knew him for 19 years.
I was sad, but I did what you were talking about, anticipatory grieving already, because I knew the possibility was really good that he was going to die, that they were not going to save his life.
This is a cliche kind of thing, but there's no way to process grief in a good way, in my belief, except going through it. You can't go around it. You can't bury it. You can't fake it.
We live in a culture that doesn't help us to grieve. It wants us to be quiet and get through it and take 2 days or 3 days and then go back to work. It doesn't want us to take the time the soul requires for grieving. So we're hurried through it.
And it took a while, I would say a number of years, before I could kind of get to a place where I could move forward. I think you're just stuck.
Grief does not go away. There is no closure on grief. And I've read enough about it, and I know there's no closure because I can just burst out crying.
It was terrible for a time, but I wouldn't be, and this is where guilt comes in for me anyway. Like, I wouldn't be where I am if he didn't die. I wouldn't have changed careers and been an educator. Maybe I wouldn't have moved back to the East Coast and had great experiences. But that was because of the loss and grief of a young brother. I wanted to do something with my life.
In the grieving, as I've experienced this, there's a way in which grief can be wild if you let it loose. Grief can be uncontrollable and unexpected, and that's not something that's really wanted in this culture.
I'm not a person who cries a lot in public. My crying happened when I went back to work. It happened at home when I was alone. I cry alone. Most of the time. But my favorite, that when I cried the most was when I was driving to work in the car. And I would look at the cars beside me and say, do they see me crying? Do they know what's going on? Yeah. I used to, when I lived in Laconia, and I'd go by a restaurant that Dan and I used to go to for supper, because a lot of times we were alone, I'd cry.
I think another reason grieving is difficult in this culture is grieving requires listening. Us listening inside ourselves. What is going on in there? Because a lot of times we push it down and close it off, and we don't know what's going on inside ourselves.
I could see it, that it was different for everybody. There was no right, there was no wrong. And listening to each other was very helpful, because they could see that there was no right or wrong, that different people did it differently.
Definitely got help and saw a therapist for the first time in my life after that, which was immensely helpful for me. But besides that, I would try to find time to be quiet and be alone in nature, if at all possible. I wrote that in his eulogy, right? And I think this is true it was true for me. Where you can be quiet and in nature is where I felt closest to him. And still to this day, that's very true. And I know I'm crying, but it's very comforting. It's not, even though crying, it's not a bad thing, right? Crying's not a bad thing, and feeling is not a bad thing. I think that is the thing that helps, because if you're not feeling it, you can't process it and move on, and I think I would just remain stuck in a very not good, unhealthy place. I went to art school before he died. I was an artist before he died. I photographed the family in a very kind of intimate way for a long time before he died. And so while he was dying in the hospital, I used my art to process, remember, create. Okay, you gotta get home. We're in California, you gotta pack 2 things. One, I packed a suit. I didn't want to pack a suit, but I packed a suit because if there was a service, I wanted that. And then I grabbed my camera bag, which was always with me, but I did stop for a minute before grabbing my bag to bring. And I was like, is this okay? Is it okay if I'm going to photograph such in the moment, not recreated, like in the moment, such a tragic event? And I just remember, I don't know, but I'm taking it. As he was in the hospital fighting for his life and we're figuring things out, sitting with my mother, and I still see, definitely more so than I see in still photographs, and I'm sitting there and my bag is next to me and my mother's sitting across, and she's there's a paper there with a story in it, and she's just quiet and sad and thinking, and I was like, I'm gonna pull out the camera, but I didn't. Right away I had a conversation with her and I asked her if it was okay, because if it was okay with her, then I think it was okay. And she said something to the effect of like, I don't know why you waited so long to start taking pictures.
And we drew pictures of Dan, of whatever you wanted to do. But it was helpful to get feelings out as you were creating things. And also there was a little bit of joy in that too, to know that there is joy with grief or after grief or whatever, that life goes on. And that was part of the art, was creating joy in a life that had a lot of grief in it.
I put a project together a year or so later and kind of had some shows around, and it was awesome. And what I mean by that, it was just awesome to do, and I'm so glad that I did it.
And a lot of this grieving, it is a group thing. We need to help each other touch our grief.
When we did grief groups, we had a grief group for 7 weeks or whatever, and then they could come back once a month to follow up on that. And some of these people who would come back years later, and they would talk about, they finally got their feelings out.
I think that's the big important thing, is that we help each other to grieve, because we are carrying so much ungrieved grief. And if we come together and one person speaks of their grief, it helps other people to touch their grief. If someone cries, it helps other people to cry and to get close to that really wounded, hurting place of loss.
I think processing through making is very important, and I don't think you have to
you know, I had some experience with that. I went to art school, whatever, but like I don't think you need to. I just you don't have to be quote unquote an artist, although everybody is an artist. Uh, to use art, the arts in any of its form, to process, to express. It doesn't have to be good. You don't have to put a show together. You don't like. It's just about the process, not product or whatever. Like it's about that process. The arts are what grounds us and connects us as humans.
I think when I go in the process of my going, people may be grieving for me, but they are also getting into the land of grief. They are going into territory where they may touch old griefs that they have that they never had a chance to mourn.
Just not be surprised that if you study 25 years later, you still burst out crying. But then you get better. It does not go away, but it gets softer. Somebody in one of my groups said that word, softer. And I think that's a good way to explain it. It's not less, it's just softer. And you go on with your life and find joy in your life.